One invitation, and the past will finally have to face me.
Mommy, is he coming to our party too?
No, little one, I'm inviting you to mine.
Some meetings happen for a reason.
Mommy, does he really not know us?
Not yet. But soon, he'll remember everything.
5 years after walking away from his wife and newborn daughter, Chanda Zulu arrived at a magnificent mansion with a golden wedding invitation in his hand. Smiling proudly, he invited the elegant businesswoman before him to witness his marriage to another woman, never realizing she was Mapalo, the wife he had abandoned when she had nothing. Beside her stood a bright little girl with his own eyes, but he failed to recognize his own daughter. Mapalo simply smiled and accepted the invitation. She had waited 5 years for this moment. What Chanda didn't know was that his wedding day would become the day the truth destroyed everything he had built. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is. We'd love to see how far this story travels across the world. And if you enjoy emotional stories about hope, justice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next journey. 5 years earlier, long before luxury cars, grand wedding halls, and expensive tailored suits became part of Chanda Zulu's life, he was simply another young husband trying to survive in Lusaka, Zambia. He and his wife, Mapalo Zulu, lived in a small 2-room rented house tucked behind a busy market district. The walls were cracked, the roof leaked whenever the rainy season arrived, and the electricity disappeared so often that candles had become part of their evening routine. Yet, despite everything they lacked, the house was filled with laughter. Every morning before sunrise, Mapalo would quietly leave their bed so she wouldn't wake either her husband or their infant daughter. She would light a charcoal stove outside, boil water for tea, and prepare a simple breakfast of porridge before beginning another exhausting day. She never complained, not because life was easy, because she believed complaints solved nothing. Instead, she filled every quiet moment with hope. "One day," she often whispered, while rocking her baby to sleep, "you'll have a room of your own. You'll never know what it means to sleep hungry." Their daughter Thandi was only 6 months old. She had inherited her mother's gentle smile and her father's dark eyes. Whenever she laughed, even the smallest rooms somehow felt brighter. Chanda loved watching his daughter giggle. In those moments, he forgot about unpaid rent, forgot about rejection letters, forgot about the endless frustration of searching for work. Every morning, he dressed carefully in the same faded blue shirt and neatly pressed trousers before walking through Lusaka, carrying a folder filled with copies of his resume. He visited construction companies, transport businesses, warehouses, office buildings, factories, anywhere that displayed a hiring notice. The answer rarely changed. "We'll call you. We've already filled the position. You don't have enough experience." By evening, he would return home with tired feet and another invisible wound to his pride. Mapalo never greeted him with questions. She greeted him with kindness. "You're home," she would say softly. "I made nshima. It's still warm." Even when there wasn't enough food for 3 people, she somehow made certain Chanda received the largest portion. He noticed, but he pretended not to. Sometimes pretending was easier than admitting how much his wife sacrificed. One evening, after another unsuccessful job search, Chanda sat outside their house staring silently at the dusty road. Children chased an old football nearby. Women returned from the market carrying baskets balanced effortlessly on their heads. Motorcycles roared past in clouds of red dust. Life continued. Only his own seemed trapped. Mapalo walked outside carrying 2 enamel cups of tea. Without speaking, she sat beside him. For several minutes they watched the sunset together. Finally, Chanda broke the silence. "I've become a disappointment." Mapalo gently shook her head. "No, I can't provide." "You are trying." "Trying doesn't feed a family." She reached for his hand. Neither does giving up. He looked away. You deserve someone better. She smiled. I married the man beside me, not the size of his paycheck. Those words stayed with him. For a while, because love can comfort an aching heart, but it cannot erase fear. Weeks became months. Their savings disappeared. Rent accumulated. The landlord began visiting almost every week. At first, he remained polite. Later, he became impatient. Finally, he became cruel. You have 1 more week, he warned. If you don't pay, I'll rent this place to someone who can. Mapalo thanked him politely after every visit, even though her hands trembled once he left. She refused to let Thandi grow up surrounded by shouting. When Chanda apologized again that night, Mapalo placed the baby into his arms. Look at her. He stared at his sleeping daughter. She doesn't care whether we're rich. She only knows whether her father loves her. For a brief moment, Chanda believed love really might be enough, but the outside world had other plans. His old school friends had begun succeeding. One opened a transport company. Another bought his first house. A third frequently posted photographs online beside expensive vehicles and international business trips. Every time Chanda saw those images on his aging phone, something inside him tightened. Comparison quietly entered his heart. Soon it became impossible to ignore. At family gatherings, the questions never stopped. When are you getting a real job? Still renting. You should never have had a child so early. You had so much potential. The words came disguised as advice, but each one felt like another stone tied around his neck. Mapalo defended him whenever she could. He's working hard. He'll find something. Please don't speak to him like that. Her loyalty only embarrassed Chanda more. He began feeling smaller every time she protected him. One afternoon, Mapalo returned from the market, carrying fewer groceries than usual. She quietly divided the food into tiny portions. Chanda noticed. Is that all? She forced a smile. The prices went up. Only later did he discover she had skipped lunch so they could buy milk for Thandi. That night, after both mother and daughter had fallen asleep, Chanda opened the small kitchen cupboard. There was almost nothing left. Half a bag of mealy meal, a handful of beans, cooking oil nearly gone. He quietly closed the cupboard before anyone saw the tears filling his eyes. The next morning, he woke before dawn. He looked at Mapalo sleeping beside their daughter. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone fighting battles every single day without ever asking for recognition. He gently brushed a loose braid away from her forehead. I'll fix this, he whispered. I promise. He meant every word. But promises are often tested by circumstances beyond imagination. As weeks passed, Chanda became increasingly desperate. He accepted temporary labor jobs unloading trucks whenever possible. Some days he earned enough to buy dinner. Other days, employers simply disappeared without paying. Still, Mapalo remained hopeful. She started baking small batches of sweet buns to sell near the bus station each morning. The profit was tiny, but every coin mattered. Sometimes Chanda accompanied her before sunrise. He watched commuters buying her fresh bread. She greeted every customer warmly, even those who bargained over a single coin. You always smile, he once asked. Aren't you tired? She laughed softly. If I stop smiling, life wins. He wished he possessed the same strength. Instead, frustration slowly changed him. He became quieter, then impatient, then easily angered by small inconveniences. When Thandi cried late at night, exhaustion replaced tenderness. When another job application failed, silence replaced conversation. Mapalo noticed the changes but never accused him. She simply prayed that tomorrow would be kinder than today. Neither of them realized that tomorrow would introduce someone capable of changing the course of every life connected to theirs. It would begin with what appeared to be an ordinary business seminar held in downtown Lusaka, a place Chanda almost decided not to attend. That single decision would become the first step toward unimaginable wealth, and the first step toward the greatest mistake of his entire life. The invitation to the business seminar almost ended up in the trash. It was nothing more than a free networking event hosted at a newly opened conference center in downtown Lusaka. A local employment office had emailed hundreds of unemployed graduates, encouraging them to attend and explore new opportunities. Chanda laughed bitterly when he first read it. "Networking," he muttered. "People with jobs network. People like me are just looking for work." Mapalo looked up from the dining table where she was packaging the last batch of sweet buns for the next morning's sales. "You should still go. It won't change anything." "Maybe not." "So why waste bus fare?" She folded the paper carefully and placed it back into his hands. "Because hope only dies when we stop walking toward it." Chanda sighed. Sometimes he wondered where his wife found such endless optimism. She never spoke like someone who had spent months worrying about rent. She never acted like someone who had skipped meals so her daughter could drink milk. Instead, she somehow carried peace into every room she entered. He kissed Thandi on the forehead before leaving the next morning. "I'll be back this afternoon." The little girl reached for his nose and giggled. Mapalo smiled. "Bring back good news." "I'll try." Those simple words echoed in his mind as he boarded an overcrowded minibus heading toward the city center. The conference hall was far more impressive than he expected. Glass walls reflected the bright Zambian sun. Luxury vehicles filled the parking lot. Men in expensive suits exchanged business cards, while women dressed in elegant professional clothing discussed investments and partnerships. For the first time in months, Chanda felt painfully aware of his worn shoes. He almost turned around, but then he remembered Mapalo's voice. "Hope only dies when we stop walking toward it." He walked inside. The morning sessions focused on entrepreneurship innovation and economic opportunities across southern Africa. Most of the presentations sounded unrealistic to someone struggling to afford dinner, yet Chanda listened carefully. Perhaps one idea could change everything. During the lunch break, participants gathered around tables covered with fruit sandwiches and coffee. Chanda quietly filled one small plate. It was the best meal he had eaten in weeks. As he searched for an empty chair, someone accidentally bumped into him. Coffee splashed across the sleeve of the woman's cream-colored blazer. "Oh!" Chanda immediately stepped backward. "I'm so sorry." The woman looked down at the stain. For one uncomfortable second, Chanda expected anger. Instead, she laughed. "It was my fault." She accepted the napkins he hurriedly offered. "It's only coffee." She appeared to be in her early 30s. Confident, beautiful, perfectly composed, her tailored clothing, expensive watch, and calm manner immediately distinguished her from everyone around them. "I'm Natasha Wansa," she said, extending her hand. "Chanda." "No surname." He smiled awkwardly. "Zulu." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Zulu." They sat together during lunch. Natasha asked questions few people had asked him recently. Not about his failures, about his ideas. What kind of work interests you? What would you build if money weren't a problem? What do you think Zambia needs most? At first, Chanda answered cautiously. Then, as the conversation continued, words flowed naturally. He spoke about affordable housing, youth employment, small manufacturing businesses, community development. Natasha listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped, she smiled. "You think like an entrepreneur." He laughed. "I think like an unemployed man." "No, She shook her head. You think bigger than your circumstances. Those words landed differently. For months, everyone else had reminded him what he lacked. Natasha spoke as though she saw potential. It felt intoxicating. Before leaving, she handed him a business card. If you're interested, my company occasionally recruits project assistants. Chanda stared at the elegant black card. I don't know what to say. Say you'll call. I will. Back home, Mapalo noticed the change immediately. His shoulders seemed lighter. His smile had returned. You look happy. I met someone. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then he quickly added, a businesswoman. Mapalo laughed. You scared me. He sat beside her and described the seminar, the speakers, the ideas, the unexpected conversation. Finally, he showed her the business card. Mapalo read the elegant gold lettering. Natalia. Natasha. You think she'll help? I don't know. But she treated me with respect. Mapalo squeezed his hand. Then call her. 3 days later, Chanda received an invitation for an interview. The position wasn't glamorous. Junior project coordinator. Temporary contract. Better than nothing. He accepted immediately. The office occupied 2 floors of a modern commercial building overlooking central Lusaka. Everything felt different. Air conditioning, professional meetings, employees carrying laptops, people discussing investments worth more than he had ever imagined. Natasha personally introduced him to the management team. This is Chanda. He has excellent ideas. The recommendation surprised everyone, including Chanda. For the first time in years, someone influential believed in him. He worked harder than anyone else. He arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for difficult assignments. Within weeks, supervisors noticed. Natasha noticed even more. You learn quickly, she told him one evening. I've had to. She smiled knowingly. Poverty teaches efficiency. He laughed. It teaches survival. The promotion came only 4 months later. Permanent employment, higher salary, company vehicle for business travel. Suddenly, bills became manageable. The landlord stopped threatening them. The kitchen cupboard remained full. Mapalo cried the day Chanda brought home groceries without checking every price tag. We can buy fruit. We can buy fruit. And chicken. He laughed. Yes. Thondi clapped excitedly without understanding why her parents were suddenly crying and laughing at the same time. Life finally seemed to reward their perseverance. But success arrived carrying invisible dangers. As Chanda spent more time inside Natasha's world, he became fascinated by everything surrounding her: luxury hotels, corporate dinners, private investors, influential politicians, international travel, power, status, opportunity. He noticed how confidently wealthy people spoke, how easily they made decisions involving millions, how naturally they discussed futures he had never imagined. One evening, Natasha invited him to an exclusive networking reception. Mapalo ironed his best shirt. You'll do great. You think so? I know so. She adjusted his collar. Just remember who you are. He kissed her forehead. I always will. She believed him. So did he. The reception was held inside one of Lusaka's finest hotels. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A live jazz band played softly in the background. Successful entrepreneurs exchanged laughter over expensive wine. Natasha introduced Chanda to investor after investor. This is the young man I mentioned. He has tremendous potential. Each compliment inflated something deep inside him. For years he had felt invisible. Now powerful people remembered his name. On the drive home, Natasha broke the silence. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you still living in that neighborhood? My family is there. She nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes. She paused carefully. The hardest thing about becoming successful is leaving behind the people who keep reminding you of who you used to be. Chanda frowned. My wife has supported me through everything. I'm sure she has. Natasha smiled politely. But support and ambition aren't always the same thing. He said nothing, yet the words stayed with him. Days later, then weeks later, they continued echoing inside his mind. Little by little, Chanda began comparing two worlds, one filled with sacrifice, modest meals, and quiet resilience. The other overflowing with wealth, influence, and limitless possibility. He didn't yet realize he had begun measuring love against success. And once a person starts making that comparison, every sacrifice begins to look like a burden. Every blessing begins to look too small. The distance between Chanda and Mapalo had not yet become visible, but for the first time since they married, it had quietly begun. At first, the changes were so small that Mapalo convinced herself she was imagining them. Chanda no longer rushed home after work. There was always another meeting, another client dinner, another networking event, another opportunity that couldn't be missed. Whenever he walked through the front door, the scent of expensive cologne had replaced the familiar smell of dust and construction sites. His shirts became newer, his shoes shinier, his phone newer than anything they had ever owned. Mapalo was genuinely happy to see him succeeding. She never questioned where the money came from. After years of hardship, she simply thanked God that her husband no longer carried the defeated expressions she had grown used to. She believed their family was finally entering a better season. What she didn't notice was that Chanda was slowly entering a different world, one that no longer had room for the life they had built together. One Saturday afternoon, Mapalo prepared Chanda's favorite meal. She spent nearly half of her week's earnings buying fresh vegetables and a small piece of beef because she wanted to celebrate his recent promotion. Thandi, now almost 1 year old, waddled around the tiny living room while laughing at her own unsteady footsteps. "Daddy will be so surprised," Mapalo whispered. She glanced at the clock. 6 o'clock, then 7, then 8. The food grew cold. At 9:30, Chanda finally walked in. "I'm sorry," he said while loosening his tie. "The meeting ran late." Mapalo smiled despite her disappointment. "It's all right. I'll warm everything. I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten." "I already had dinner." Her smile froze for only a second. "With your colleagues?" "Yes." She nodded. "I understand." She truly tried to. After all, successful people attended business dinners. She reminded herself that this was simply part of his new career. But those dinners became more frequent. Soon they happened 3 or 4 nights each week. Even when Chanda was physically home, his attention wasn't. His phone constantly buzzed with messages. He smiled at conversations she couldn't see. Sometimes he stepped outside to answer calls. When she asked who it was, he simply replied, "Work." One evening, Thandi ran toward him with open arms the moment he entered the house. "Dada." She had only recently learned to say the word. Mapalo expected Chanda to sweep their daughter into his arms the way he once had. Instead, he gently moved around her. "Not now." "I'm exhausted." The little girl remained standing in the middle of the room, confused. Her tiny smile slowly disappeared. Mapalo quietly picked her up. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't. Not really. Days later, Chanda announced unexpected news. "My company wants me to move closer to the city." Mapalo looked surprised. "When?" "Soon. We can start looking together." He hesitated. "They're providing executive apartments." Her eyes brightened. that's wonderful. Then she noticed something. You said they're providing. Not. They're providing one for us. A strange silence settled between them. It's temporary, Chanda finally explained. I'll be working long hours. So we'll visit. Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. Mapalo stared at him. Something inside her heart tightened. For the first time since they married, she felt as though she was speaking to someone she barely recognized. Weeks passed. Chanda moved into the company apartment. He still visited, but less often. Sometimes only once each week. Sometimes not at all. Every excuse sounded reasonable. A delayed project, unexpected travel, important investors. Mapalo accepted every explanation because love naturally searches for reasons to trust. One rainy evening, she decided to surprise him. She packed homemade food into insulated containers, dressed Thandi in her warmest sweater, and took 2 crowded buses across Lusaka to the address he had given her. The apartment building looked like something from another world. Tall glass windows, private security guards, perfectly maintained gardens, luxury cars lined the entrance. Mapalo suddenly felt self-conscious about her simple dress and worn shoes. She adjusted Thandi on her hip and smiled politely at the receptionist. I'm here to see my husband. What apartment? She gave Chanda's number. The receptionist made a phone call. Moments later, Chanda appeared in the lobby. Instead of smiling, he looked alarmed. What are you doing here? I wanted to surprise you. She lifted the food containers. I made your favorite stew. He glanced nervously around the lobby. Several executives were walking past. Natasha emerged from the elevator, speaking with 2 foreign investors. For one brief second, their eyes met. Mapalo noticed the elegant woman immediately. Natasha offered a polite smile. You have visitors? Chanda answered quickly. Yes, they're. He paused. Mapalo waited. Relatives. The word struck harder than a slap. Relatives. Not my wife. Not my daughter. Just relatives. Natasha nodded politely before continuing toward the exit. Mapalo remained frozen. Thandi reached toward Chanda. Dada! Several people turned. Chanda lowered his voice immediately. Please. Not here. Mapalo looked directly into his eyes. You couldn't even introduce us. It wasn't the right moment. The right moment. You don't understand how business works. She spoke quietly. No. I understand perfectly. He rubbed his forehead. Everything is complicated now. Is your family complicated? My career is at a critical stage, so we're embarrassing. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She handed him the containers. The food will get cold. Then she turned and walked away before he could answer. On the crowded bus ride home, she stared silently through rain-covered windows. She cried without making a sound, not because Chanda had forgotten dinner, not because he had moved away, but because for the first time she had seen shame in his eyes, not shame about abandoning his responsibilities, shame about acknowledging his own family. That night, Chanda barely slept. He replayed the lobby conversation over and over. Part of him knew he had crossed a line. Another part insisted it had been necessary. The corporate world judged appearances. Investors expected sophistication. Executives respected ambition. He convinced himself that introducing his struggling wife and poorly dressed child would only complicate everything. It was only temporary. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. A few days later, Natasha invited him to dinner. After discussing several upcoming projects, she looked at him thoughtfully. You seem distracted. I had a disagreement at home. She nodded. Families often struggle when one person grows faster than everyone else. He remained silent. She continued carefully. Sometimes love is enough. And sometimes, she paused, love asks us to stay in places we've already outgrown. The words settled heavily in the quiet restaurant. For the first time, Chanda didn't defend Mapalo. He simply stared into his untouched coffee. Natasha watched him without saying another word. She didn't need to. The doubt had already been planted, and like every dangerous seed, it only needed time to grow. Back in the small rented house, Mapalo tucked Thandi into bed before kneeling beside her. She prayed for her husband. She prayed for her marriage. She prayed that success would never steal the kind-hearted man she had fallen in love with. She had no idea that while she prayed for restoration, Chanda was already beginning to imagine a future without her. For the next several weeks, the distance between Chanda and Mapalo could no longer be explained by work alone. He stopped calling every evening. Sometimes he answered her messages hours later. Sometimes not at all. When Mapalo asked whether everything was all right, his replies became shorter. "I'm busy. We'll talk later. Don't worry." Those 3 sentences gradually replaced the long conversations they once shared. Yet every night before going to bed, Mapalo still left the porch light on, no matter how late it became. She wanted him to know that someone was always waiting for him. One Friday afternoon, Chanda received unexpected news. Natasha invited him to accompany her on a 3-day business conference in Johannesburg. The company would pay for everything: flights, hotel, meals, meetings with international investors. For Chanda, it felt like stepping into the future he had always dreamed about. When he told Mapalo about the trip, she smiled with genuine excitement. "That's wonderful." "You really think so?" "Of course." She hugged him. "I'm proud of you." He hesitated before returning the embrace. Somewhere deep inside, guilt quietly stirred. The conference exceeded every expectation. Luxury hotels overlooked the skyline. Successful entrepreneurs discussed expansion across southern Africa. Investors praised Chanda's ideas during several presentations. For the first time in his life, influential people treated him as someone whose opinions mattered. Each compliment fed a hunger he hadn't fully understood until now. On the final evening, Natasha and Chanda stood on the rooftop terrace after the closing dinner. The city lights stretched endlessly below. "It wasn't long ago," Natasha said softly, "that nobody here even knew your name." Chanda smiled. "Neither did I imagine any of this." "You earned it." "I was lucky." "No." She turned toward him. "You were ambitious." After a moment of silence, she asked the question that changed everything. "Have you ever wondered how far you could go if nothing held you back?" Chanda frowned. "What do you mean?" "You have talent. You have discipline. But every successful person eventually has to choose." "Choose what?" "Between the life they had." She paused. "And the life they're capable of building." Her words lingered in the cool evening air. "I have responsibilities." "I know, and responsibilities are admirable." She smiled gently. "But they can also become chains." He didn't answer. Yet for the rest of the flight home, those words refused to leave his mind. Chains. The word echoed louder than it should have. Back in Lusaka, Mapalo and little Thandi welcomed him home with laughter. Thandi ran into his arms. This time he picked her up. She wrapped both tiny hands around his neck. "Dada!" For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Mapalo served dinner while excitedly asking about Johannesburg. "What was it like?" "Beautiful." "Did you take pictures?" "A few." She laughed while looking through his phone. Towering buildings, business meetings, elegant restaurants. Then she stopped. One photograph showed Chanda and Natasha standing together during a formal reception. They looked comfortable, natural, successful. Mapalo smiled politely. Your boss seems very kind. She is. You make a good team. He simply nodded. That night, after Mapalo had fallen asleep, Chanda remained awake. He looked around their small bedroom. The peeling paint, the old wardrobe, the patched curtains. 5 years ago, he would have called this home. Now, it felt impossibly small. The following Monday, Natasha requested a private meeting. I've recommended you for Regional Development Director. Chanda stared at her. That's impossible. It isn't. The board likes you. His heart raced. This position comes with significant responsibility and a substantial salary. He could barely breathe. Then Natasha continued. There is one concern. What concern? The board prefers executives with uncomplicated public lives. I don't understand. She chose her words carefully. International investors notice everything. Image matters. He remained silent. They've asked questions about your family. My family. They're concerned. About what? They worry your personal circumstances don't match the executive profile we're presenting. The room suddenly felt colder. So what are you saying? I'm saying. She looked directly into his eyes. You need to decide what kind of future you truly want. For several days, Chanda wrestled with thoughts he hated himself for having. He loved Mapalo. Didn't he? He loved Thandi. Didn't he? But another voice kept whispering, you deserve more. You worked too hard to remain trapped. You finally have a chance. Don't throw it away. Every promotion, every expensive office, every handshake with powerful people made returning to his old life feel increasingly impossible. Finally, late one evening, he drove back to the small rented house. Mapalo opened the door with her usual warm smile. I didn't expect you tonight. We need to talk. Something in his voice made her heartbeat quicken. She quietly put Thandi to bed before returning to the living room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Neither of them spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Chanda stood. I can't do this anymore. Mapalo blinked. What do you mean, this life? Our marriage. She stared at him as if she hadn't heard correctly. You're tired. No. I've made my decision. Silence. Heavy. Unbelievable silence. Chanda, I've changed. So have I. We've changed together. He shook his head. No. You stayed the same. The words pierced deeper than either of them expected. I don't understand. Our lives are moving in different directions. We can adjust. We always have. You don't belong in the world I'm entering. Mapalo's eyes slowly filled with tears, and because of that, you want to leave your family. He couldn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strangely distant. I think it's best. For who? Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. For all of us. Mapalo looked towards the bedroom where Thandi slept peacefully. She asks for you every night. I'll provide financially. She doesn't need your money. She needs her father. He lowered his eyes. I can't be both. Mapalo took a trembling step closer. Look at me. He didn't. Please. Slowly, he lifted his head. The man standing before her still had the same face she had loved through years of poverty, but something inside him had disappeared. When did you stop fighting for us? He whispered the answer almost too quietly to hear. I don't know. She nodded lowly. I think you do. He reached into his briefcase and removed an envelope. Inside were divorce papers already prepared by a lawyer. Mapalo stared at them without touching them. "You planned this." He said nothing. "You planned this while I was praying for our marriage." Again. Silence. Then little footsteps echoed from the hallway. Half asleep, Thandi wandered into the living room carrying her small blanket. She rubbed her eyes before smiling. "Dada!" She reached toward him. For a brief second, Chanda almost dropped everything. Almost. Instead, he knelt and kissed her forehead. "I'm sorry." The little girl smiled without understanding. Mapalo gathered her daughter into her arms as tears finally rolled down her face. She did not scream. She did not beg. She simply asked one final question. When she grows up and asks why her father left, what should I tell her? Chanda stood frozen. No answer came. He picked up his briefcase, walked toward the door, paused only once, then left. The sound of the closing door echoed through the tiny house like the end of an entire lifetime. Mapalo stood there holding her sleeping daughter, staring at the empty doorway. Everything she had built, everything she had believed, had vanished in a single night. The first morning after Chanda left felt strangely quiet. No footsteps crossed the worn wooden floor. No familiar voice called out before sunrise. No one reached for the cup of tea Mapalo had prepared out of habit. She stood in the tiny kitchen staring at 2 steaming mugs before slowly pouring one back into the kettle. For the first time since their marriage, she drank tea alone. Thandi, too young to understand what had happened, wandered into the kitchen carrying her stuffed cloth elephant. "Mama." Mapalo forced a smile. "Good morning, my sunshine." "Dada." The single word nearly shattered her. She knelt beside her daughter and gently brushed a curl away from the little girl's forehead. "Daddy has gone away for work." "When coming home?" Mapalo swallowed the lump in her throat. I don't know." Thandi accepted the answer with the innocent trust only a child possesses. She simply nodded before asking for breakfast. Children have a remarkable way of continuing to live in the present while adults become trapped by yesterday. Mapalo wished she could do the same. 3 days later, she received official divorce documents. Attached was a letter written in Chanda's handwriting. He apologized. He claimed they had grown apart. He promised to provide financial support. He insisted the decision was necessary for everyone's future. There wasn't a single sentence admitting he had abandoned the family that had stood beside him when he had nothing. Mapalo folded the letter carefully. Then she placed it inside a small wooden box together with their wedding photograph. She did not burn it. She did not tear it apart. She simply closed the lid. Some memories deserved to remain buried. The promised financial support arrived only once. A modest bank transfer appeared the following month. After that, nothing. Whenever Mapalo called, Chanda's assistant answered instead. "Mr. Zulu is in a meeting." "Mr. Zulu is traveling." "Mr. Zulu is unavailable." Eventually, the calls stopped altogether. It became painfully clear. The man who had once kissed his daughter goodnight had chosen to disappear completely. Without his income, survival became even more difficult than before. Rent consumed nearly everything she earned selling bread. Medical bills arrived after Thandi caught pneumonia during the cold season. The landlord, who had briefly become patient when Chanda found work, quickly returned to his old habits. "You've fallen behind again." "I only need another week," Mapalo pleaded. "I've heard that before." "I'll pay." "With what?" She lowered her eyes. "I'll find a way." The landlord sighed heavily. "I have another family interested in this house. You have 7 days. After he left, Mapalo sat on the edge of the bed. She wanted to cry. Instead, she opened a notebook. Across the first page, she wrote 5 simple words. I will not give up. Then she made a list. Bake more bread, find evening work, offer laundry services, clean offices, sell handmade soap. Every possible source of income, every possible chance to survive. If life refused to open one door, she would knock on 10 more. For months, her routine became almost impossible. She woke at 4 every morning, mixed dough before sunrise, sold fresh buns outside the bus station until 8, worked as a cleaner in a small medical clinic during the afternoon, returned home just long enough to feed Thandi, then spent evenings washing clothes for wealthier families. By the time she fell asleep each night, her hands ached so badly she could barely straighten her fingers. Yet she never allowed Thandi to see her despair. Every bedtime ended the same way. A story, a prayer, a kiss. We're going to be all right, she whispered every night. Sometimes she believed it. Sometimes she simply needed Thandi to believe it. One afternoon, while delivering freshly baked bread to a neighborhood clinic, Mapalo noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry several heavy grocery bags. People walked past without stopping. Some glanced briefly before continuing on their way. The old woman stumbled. One bag burst open. Oranges rolled across the pavement. Mapalo immediately handed her breadbasket to another vendor. I'll be right back. She hurried over and began gathering the scattered fruit. Please let me help. The elderly woman smiled warmly. You'll be late for work. That's all right. They're only groceries. They're important to you. Together, they carried everything to a nearby bench. The woman's breathing remained uneven. You should rest for a few minutes. My knees aren't what they used to be. Mapalo laughed softly. My mother says the same thing. The woman looked at her carefully. You remind me of someone. My daughter? No. My younger self. Mapalo smiled politely. I don't know about that. I do. The elderly woman introduced herself. My name is Beatrice Mulenga. It's nice to meet you. I'm Mapalo. You have kind eyes, Mapalo. They've seen difficult days. Mapalo hesitated. Everyone has. Mama Beatrice nodded thoughtfully. True. But not everyone keeps kindness after suffering. They spoke for almost 20 minutes. Nothing extraordinary. Just ordinary conversation. Family. Weather. Life in Lusaka. Before leaving, Mama Beatrice reached into her handbag. Allow me to pay you for your help. Mapalo immediately stepped back. No. You've already given me your time. Please. I can't. You need the money. Mapalo smiled gently. Maybe. But kindness shouldn't come with a price. The older woman's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Few people refused money, especially people whose clothes quietly revealed financial hardship. You surprise me. My mother taught me something. What was that? If you only help people who can repay you, you aren't really helping. Mama Beatrice stared at her for several silent seconds. Then she slowly nodded. I hope we meet again. So do I. Mapalo returned to work believing the encounter had ended there. She never imagined the elegant elderly widow owned one of Zambia's largest food manufacturing companies, nor did she know that Mama Beatrice had spent years searching for someone whose character mattered more than appearances. Over the following weeks, life remained difficult. Mapalo was eventually forced to leave the small rented house after falling behind on rent. She found a single-room apartment on the outskirts of Lusaka. The roof leaked. The bathroom was shared by 4 families. The neighborhood was noisy, but it was safe. Thandi adapted more quickly than Mapalo expected. One evening, while arranging their few belongings inside the new room, The little girl looked around proudly. I like it. You do. It has a window. Mapalo laughed through tears. Yes, it does. And we can see stars. Mapalo looked at outside. Only a tiny patch of sky was visible between neighboring buildings. Still, 3 bright stars shone through. She lifted Thandi into her arms. You're right. It's beautiful. Children rarely measured wealth by square meters or expensive furniture. They measured it by love. That night, after Thandi fell asleep, Mapalo sat beside the small window with her notebook. Below the words, I will not give up, she added another sentence. One day, my daughter will be proud of the life we built together. At that exact moment, across another part of Lusaka, Mama Beatrice sat inside her spacious home, thinking about the young woman who had refused money without hesitation. The following morning, she asked her longtime assistant to find someone. A young mother named Mapalo Zulu. The assistant looked surprised. Is she applying for a job? Mama Beatrice smiled quietly. Perhaps. Or perhaps she's the person I've been looking for all along. Neither woman knew it yet, but their chance meeting beside a scattered bag of oranges was about to change both of their lives forever. Mapalo had almost forgotten about the elderly woman. Life left little room for dwelling on brief encounters. Each day followed the same exhausting rhythm. She woke before dawn, baked bread over a charcoal stove, delivered pastries to nearby kiosks, cleaned offices in the afternoon, and spent evenings helping a neighborhood tailor sew school uniforms for extra income. By the time she lay down beside Thandi each night, every muscle in her body ached. Still, she never allowed herself to complain. Whenever she felt overwhelmed, she looked at her sleeping daughter. That was enough to remind her why she had to keep going. One Tuesday morning, as she was preparing dough, someone knocked gently on her door. She glanced outside. A well-dressed man in his early 50s stood beside a black sedan parked on the dusty road. He carried a leather briefcase. Good morning, he said politely. Are you Mrs. Mapalo Zulu? She hesitated. Yes. My name is Benson Chibesa. I work for Mrs. Beatrice Mulenga. Recognition immediately appeared on her face. The elderly woman I met near the clinic. He smiled. She remembers you very well. Mapalo looked confused. Is everything all right? She would like to invite you to breakfast. Mapalo instinctively glanced at her simple clothing. There must be some mistake. There isn't. I don't know anyone important. You know Mrs. Mulenga. I only helped carry her groceries. Apparently, Benson smiled warmly. That was enough. Mapalo almost declined. She had bread to deliver, laundry waiting, bills to pay. Breakfast with wealthy strangers belonged to another world. But Benson spoke gently. Mrs. Mulenga rarely insists. This time she did. After asking a neighbor to watch Thandi for a few hours, Mapalo accepted. The black sedan drove through neighborhoods she had only seen from crowded buses. Wide streets, beautiful gardens, elegant homes protected by high stone walls. Everything felt impossibly distant from her own life. When they arrived, the gates slowly opened. The house beyond wasn't merely large, it was graceful. Old trees shaded the garden. Flowers bloomed along winding stone paths. Nothing about the property felt flashy. Instead, it reflected quiet confidence. Mama Beatrice greeted Mapalo personally at the front entrance. I'm so glad you came. Thank you for inviting me. You look surprised. I am. The older woman laughed softly. Good. Surprises keep life interesting. Breakfast was served on a sunlit terrace overlooking the garden. Fresh fruit, homemade bread, tea, simple food beautifully prepared. No unnecessary luxury, no attempt to impress. That immediately put Mapalo at ease. For nearly an hour they spoke about ordinary things, childhood memories, parenthood, community, faith. Only after breakfast did Mama Beatrice ask the question she truly wanted answered. "Tell me about your life." Mapalo hesitated. "There isn't much to tell." "I think there is." For the first time in years, someone listened without interrupting. Mapalo spoke honestly. She described marrying young, building dreams with Chanda, the joy of Thandi's birth, financial struggles, his growing distance, the divorce, raising her daughter alone. She never insulted Chanda, never blamed anyone else, never exaggerated her suffering. She simply told the truth. When she finished, Mama Beatrice remained silent for several moments. "You still don't hate him?" Mapalo looked into her tea. "Hate is heavy. I'm already carrying enough." The older woman's eyes softened. "And if he came back?" "I don't know." She smiled sadly. "But I know I can't stop living while waiting for someone who already left." Benson quietly observed the conversation. He had worked beside Mama Beatrice for 25 years. He recognized the expression on her face. She had found someone special. After breakfast, Mama Beatrice stood. "Walk with me." They strolled slowly through the gardens. Finally, she stopped beneath an old jacaranda tree. "I built my company 40 years ago." Mapalo looked surprised. "I didn't know. I started with one delivery truck. And now, more than 3,000 employees." Mapalo smiled sincerely. "That's incredible." "It wasn't easy." "It never is." Mama Beatrice nodded. "I've learned something." "What's that?" "Skills can be taught. Character cannot." She turned toward Mapalo. "The day we met, you refused money. You helped me because you thought I needed help, not because you expected anything." Mapalo shrugged gently. "It felt like the right thing." "Exactly." Mama Beatrice reached into her handbag and removed a folder. "I'd like to offer you a position." Mapalo blinked. "A job?" "Yes. I don't have business experience." "You'll learn." "I've never managed people." "You'll learn." "I don't have a university degree." "You'll earn one." Mapalo stared at her in disbelief. "What kind of position?" "Executive trainee." Her eyes widened. "There must be hundreds of people more qualified." "There are." "Then why me?" Mama Beatrice smiled. "Because qualifications built my company." "But character preserved it." Tears unexpectedly filled Mapalo's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll try." "What if I fail?" "Then we'll learn together." Mapalo accepted. Not because the salary was generous, not because the office was beautiful, but because for the first time since Chanda left, someone believed in her potentials before seeing her achievements. Training began the following Monday. Everything felt overwhelming. Computers, financial reports, meetings, marketing, supply chains, management. During the first week, Mapalo questioned herself constantly. She made mistakes, typed too slowly, misunderstood terminology, asked endless questions. Several younger employees whispered behind her back, "She doesn't belong here." Wasn't she selling bread? Who hires someone like that? The comments stung, but she ignored them. Every evening after work, she borrowed business books from the company library. After putting Thandi to bed, she studied until midnight. Accounting, leadership, negotiation, communication. Sometimes she fell asleep over open textbooks, then woke before sunrise to begin again. 3 months passed. Gradually, everything changed. She learned faster than anyone expected. Her practical understanding of ordinary customers gave her insights that experienced executives often overlooked. She proposed small improvements in product packaging, suggested community partnerships, recommended affordable food programs in lower-income neighborhoods. Sales quietly improved. One afternoon, Benson entered Mama Beatrice's office carrying several performance reports. "You were right. I know. She outperformed every trainee. I expected that." "You expected all of this." Mama Beatrice smiled while reading another report. "No. I expected even more." Meanwhile, Chanda's career continued rising. His promotion to Regional Development Director became official. He now traveled frequently across southern Africa. His photographs regularly appeared in business magazines beside Natasha Mwansa. People admired them as a powerful professional team. Many quietly assumed they were more than colleagues. Neither of them corrected the rumors. One evening after an awards ceremony, Natasha raised a glass. "To new beginnings." Chanda smiled. "To success." As cameras flashed around them, neither noticed the television screen across the ballroom. A local business segment briefly highlighted a community food initiative launched by the Mulenga Foundation. Standing beside Mama Beatrice during the interview was a newly appointed project manager. The camera captured her for only a few seconds, not long enough for Chanda to notice. Not long enough to recognize the woman whose quiet strength had once built his entire world. Fate had brought them closer than ever before, yet they remained strangers passing through the same city. For now. A year passed, then another. What had begun as an opportunity slowly became a transformation. Mapalo no longer looked like the frightened young mother who had arrived at the Mulenga Foundation, carrying years of disappointment on her shoulders. She had become one of the organization's most respected project managers, not because she was the loudest voice in the room, not because she demanded attention, but because she listened before speaking. Every proposal she presented began with the same question. How will this help ordinary families? To some executives, it sounded old-fashioned. To Mama Beatrice, it sounded like true leadership. Mapalo never forgot where she had come from. Every Friday evening, instead of going to expensive restaurants with colleagues, she returned to the neighborhood where she had once sold bread. She bought vegetables from the same elderly vendors. She greeted the same bus drivers by name. She quietly paid school fees for children whose parents could no longer afford them. No newspapers covered these acts of kindness. She preferred it that way. One afternoon, Benson found her reviewing reports long after everyone else had gone home. "You should rest." "I will." "You've been saying that for 3 hours." She smiled. "The community nutrition project needs to be finished." Benson sat across from her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you work this hard?" She looked out the office window toward the setting sun. "Because someone believed in me when I had no reason to believe in myself." Benson nodded. "And because of your daughter." Mapalo smiled immediately. "Mostly because of my daughter." Thandi was now 6 years old. Bright, curious, exceptionally kind. She had inherited her mother's quiet strength and her father's sharp intelligence. Every afternoon after school, she waited patiently in Mama Beatrice's office until Mapalo finished work. The elderly businesswoman adored the little girl. Together they played chess, read storybooks, watered flowers in the garden. Sometimes Thandi asked questions that made every adult pause. One evening she looked up from her homework. "Mama." "Yes." "Did Daddy forget where we live?" The pencil froze in Mapalo's hand. For years she had prepared herself for this conversation, yet nothing could truly prepare a mother. She set her paperwork aside. "No." "Then why doesn't he visit?" Mapalo gently pulled her daughter into her lap. "Sometimes adults make decisions they later regret. Did I do something wrong?" The question pierced straight through her heart. No. Never. Then why did he leave? Mapalo closed her eyes for a brief second. She refused to allow bitterness to become part of her daughter's childhood. Your father made a mistake. People make mistakes. Even grown-ups. Thandi looked thoughtful. Will he come back someday? I don't know. If he does, can I still hug him? Tears threatened to escape. Mapalo smiled instead. If your heart wants to. She kissed her daughter's forehead. But always remember something. What? The way someone treats you tells you who they are. It never tells you who you are. Thandi nodded slowly. I'll remember. Watching from the doorway, Mama Beatrice quietly wiped a tear from her own eye. Later that evening, she joined Mapalo on the veranda. You handled that beautifully. I hope so. You never spoke badly about him. Mapalo stared into their darkness. She's carrying enough questions. She doesn't need my anger, too. Mama Beatrice reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You're becoming the woman I knew you could be. Mapalo laughed softly. I still have so much to learn. We all do. The older woman hesitated before continuing. I've been thinking about the future. What future? My retirement. Mapalo turned toward her. Please don't talk like that. It's reality. I've built this company for 40 years. Now I must think about who will protect it after I'm gone. Mapalo smiled. You'll find the right person. I already have. The younger woman looked confused. Mama Beatrice continued. I'm appointing you Director of Community Development. Mapalo's eyes widened. No. Yes. I'm not ready. You weren't ready to become a trainee. You succeeded. You weren't ready to become a manager. You succeeded. You won't feel ready for this either. But you'll succeed. Mapalo shook her head repeatedly. There are people with more experience. There are. Then why me? Because experience teaches people how to run companies. Mama Beatrice smiled warmly. You already know how to care for people. The rest can be learned. 3 months later, the announcement became official. Newspapers across Zambia published articles praising the company's commitment to promoting talented women into leadership. Photographs of Mapalo appeared beside Mama Beatrice during the ceremony. Television interviews followed. Business magazines requested profiles. For the first time in years, Mapalo's name quietly entered Zambia's corporate world. She accepted every compliment with humility. This success belongs to many people. My daughter, my mentor, my colleagues, the communities we serve. She never spoke as though she had accomplished anything alone. Meanwhile, Chanda's life looked almost perfect from the outside. He had become one of Natasha Mwansa's most trusted executives. Luxury apartments, international flights, business awards, magazine interviews, everything he had once dreamed about. Yet success had slowly changed him. Employees noticed he rarely smiled unless cameras were present. Old friends found him difficult to reach. Even his own relatives complained that he had become distant. One evening, Natasha invited him to celebrate another major investment deal. As musicians performed softly in an elegant restaurant, she raised her glass. You've come a long way. So have you. She studied him carefully. Do you ever think about your old life? He answered immediately. No. The response came too quickly, too confidently. Natasha noticed. You never mention your family. They're part of my past. Nothing more. He forced a smile. Nothing more. But later that night, while driving home through Lusaka, he stopped at a traffic light near the old market district. On the sidewalk, he noticed a young father carrying his sleepy daughter on his shoulders while the child's mother walked beside them laughing. The little girl wrapped both arms around her father's head. For just a second, he remembered Thandi doing exactly the same thing years earlier. The traffic light turned green. Cars behind him sounded their horns. He drove away, but the image refused to disappear. Back at home, he opened a drawer searching for an old passport. Instead, he found something he hadn't seen in years. A faded family photograph. Mapalo, himself, baby Thandi, standing outside the tiny rented house, everyone smiling. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the drawer. Some memories were easier to hide than confront. Across the city, Mapalo tucked Thandi into bed before reviewing documents for an important charity gala scheduled later that year. It would bring together business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and major investors from across Zambia. The event promised to become one of the largest social gatherings in Lusaka. Neither Mapalo nor Chanda realized they had both accepted invitations to attend. After 5 long years, their paths were no longer moving in parallel. They were finally beginning to cross. Neither of them was prepared for what would happen when they did. The annual Hope for Tomorrow charity gala had become one of Lusaka's most prestigious events. Every year, business leaders, government officials, philanthropists, and investors gathered to raise money for education, healthcare, and community development across Zambia. For Mapalo, the evening was not about prestige. It was about purpose. As Director of Community Development, she had spent nearly 6 months organizing projects that would be presented during the gala. Every donation collected that night would help build rural clinics, provide scholarships for vulnerable children, and support women starting small businesses. She wanted everything to be perfect. 3 days before the event, she stood inside the grand ballroom overseeing the final preparations. Workers adjusted lighting. Florists arranged white lilies and blue hydrangeas across every table. Volunteers rehearsed guest registration. Benson approached carrying a tablet filled with schedules. "We're almost ready," Mapalo smiled. "I'll believe that after the last guest leaves." He laughed, still trying to control everything. "I'm trying to prevent surprises." Benson shook his head. "Life has never listened to your plans." She smiled knowingly. "No, it certainly hasn't." Across the city, Chanda was preparing for the same event for entirely different reasons. His company had become one of the evening's principal sponsors. Natasha would deliver one of the keynote speeches. Chanda had been invited to represent the executive leadership team and strengthen relationships with government officials and international investors. As he adjusted his black tuxedo before the mirror, Natasha entered the room. "You clean up well," he smiled. "I've had a good teacher." She straightened his bow tie. "There will be journalists everywhere tonight." "I know. Several people want interviews with you." "That's unexpected." "You've become one of the country's fastest rising executives." She paused. "And people admire success." Chanda nodded. Success. The word still gave him satisfaction. Yet lately it no longer felt as complete as it once had. Something remained missing. He simply refused to identify what it was. That evening, luxury vehicles lined the entrance to the Grand Lusaka Convention Center. Camera flashes illuminated the red carpet. Reporters interviewed celebrities, politicians, athletes, and business leaders as guests entered the ballroom. Inside, a live orchestra played soft instrumental music while hundreds of elegantly dressed guests greeted one another. Mapalo arrived through a side entrance reserved for organizers. She wore a beautifully tailored emerald green evening gown, simple, elegant, and understated. Her hair was styled neatly into a low braided bun. A pair of pearl earrings, a gift from Mama Beatrice, completed her appearance. She looked graceful rather than extravagant. Exactly as she preferred. Thandi had begged to attend, but because the evening would last late into the night, she was spending the evening with Mama Beatrice at the family estate. "Go change lives," the little girl had said proudly before Mapalo left. "I'll stay with Grandma Beatrice." Mapalo kissed her forehead. "I'll bring you dessert." "You always do." Those simple words filled her heart with warmth. As guests continued arriving, Mapalo moved confidently through the ballroom, greeting sponsors and community leaders. Many people stopped to congratulate her. "Your rural health program has been incredible. We've heard wonderful things. The scholarship initiative is changing lives." She accepted every compliment with humility. This was a team effort. No one changes communities alone. Meanwhile, Chanda entered through the main entrance beside Natasha. Almost immediately, photographers surrounded them. Mr. Zulu. Ms. Mwansa. "This way. One more picture." They smiled professionally. After years inside the corporate world, Chanda had become comfortable in front of cameras. As they entered the ballroom, he noticed how many influential people immediately approached Natasha. Cabinet ministers, foreign ambassadors, international investors. She belonged effortlessly in this environment, and by standing beside her, so did he. Or at least, that was what he had convinced himself. The program began shortly after 7. Guests took their seats while videos highlighted the foundation's achievements. Schools, clean water projects, health clinics, agricultural training. Everything funded through partnerships built over many years. When the Master of Ceremonies announced the Director of Community Development, polite applause filled the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Mapalo Zulu." Chanda, who had been quietly checking messages on his phone, barely looked toward the stage. The surname caught his attention. Zulu. His head lifted automatically. The woman walking confidently toward the podium seemed strangely familiar, but the distance was too great, the lighting too bright. He dismissed the feeling. There were many people named Zulu. Mapalo thanked the audience before beginning her presentation. She didn't speak about profits. She spoke about people, about a young boy who received life-saving surgery because strangers believed every child deserved hope, about widows who transformed tiny vegetable gardens into thriving businesses, about girls who became the first in their families to attend university. Her voice remained calm, steady, authentic. She never exaggerated emotion. She simply told real stories. The ballroom grew silent. Even seasoned executives leaned forward. When she finished, the applause lasted nearly a full minute. Natasha turned toward Chanda. "Impressive." He nodded absent-mindedly. There was something familiar about her. "You know her?" "I don't think so." But he couldn't explain it. There was something about her voice, the way she paused before important sentences, the quiet confidence. It reminded him of someone. After the presentation, guests mingled during the dinner reception. Mapalo spent much of the evening speaking with donors interested in expanding several community projects. She hardly noticed Chanda standing across the ballroom discussing investment opportunities. Fate seemed determined to keep them apart just a little longer. Later in the evening, Benson approached Mapalo. "Someone wants to meet you." "Who?" "A representative from Mwansa Global Holdings." Mapalo nodded politely. "They're considering supporting the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative." "Excellent. I'll speak with them." She followed Benson toward one of the private reception lounges. At the very same moment, Natasha turned to Chanda. "I'd like you to meet the woman behind tonight's community projects. I think the two of you might work well together." Without realizing it, both of them were walking toward the same room from opposite directions. Mapalo entered first. She stood beside a display showing photographs of women whose businesses had flourished through the Foundation's microfinance program. Seconds later, The door opened again. Chanda stepped inside beside Natasha. He glanced casually toward the woman standing near the display. She slowly turned. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. His breathing caught. The elegant woman before him looked nothing like the exhausted young mother he had abandoned 5 years earlier. Yet her eyes, they were exactly the same. Before he could understand why his heart had suddenly begun racing, Natasha smiled warmly. "Mr. Zulu, I'd like you to meet one of the most remarkable women in Zambia's non-profit sector." Mapalo extended her hand with complete composure. "Good evening. It's a pleasure to meet you." Chanda stared at her hand, then into her face. Recognition hovered just beyond his reach, but it had not arrived. Not yet. For several long seconds, Chanda simply stared at the woman standing before him. She looked familiar, painfully familiar. Yet nothing seemed to fit the memory he carried. The Mapalo, he remembered, had worn faded dresses, tied her hair back in a hurried braid every morning, and carried flour on her hands after baking bread before sunrise. The woman before him stood with effortless confidence. Her emerald gown reflected the soft lights of the reception lounge. Her posture was graceful, her voice calm. There was no trace of bitterness in her expression, only quiet dignity. Natasha broke the silence with a smile. "Mrs. Zulu, this is Mr. Chanda Zulu, our Regional Development Director." Mapalo extended her hand. "It's a pleasure." Chanda hesitated for the briefest moment before shaking it. "The pleasure is mine." Her handshake was warm but professional. No anger, no accusation, no trembling. Nothing that revealed she had once trusted this man with her entire future. He studied her face again. "Have we met before?" Mapalo smiled politely. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." It wasn't a lie. The people standing in that room were no longer the husband and wife they had once been. They were strangers, shaped by 5 years of completely different lives. Natasha laughed softly. "I knew it. You looked like you were trying to remember something." Chanda forced a smile. "You just have one of those familiar faces." Mapalo inclined her head. "I've been told that before." Benson, standing nearby, watched the exchange without saying a word. He knew the entire history. So did Mama Beatrice, who had quietly entered the reception lounge moments earlier. Neither of them interrupted. Sometimes truth required patience. The conversation soon turned toward business. Natasha gestured toward the display boards showing community projects. "Mrs. Zulu has transformed several rural development initiatives. We're considering becoming long-term partners." Chanda looked through the presentation materials. Every page reflected careful planning, clear financial accountability, measurable social impact. "This is impressive," Mapalo thanked him. "Our goal isn't simply to donate money. It's to create independence. We want families to build sustainable futures." Something about those words stirred an old memory. Years earlier, Mapalo had once said almost exactly the same thing while they were discussing dreams over a candlelit dinner in their tiny rented house. "We don't need people to rescue us," she had told him. "We need opportunities to stand on our own." The memory flashed through his mind and disappeared just as quickly. He looked at her again. "Your ideas, they're very practical." She smiled. "They come from experience. I've learned that people don't need pity. They need dignity." Mama Beatrice quietly observed Chanda's reaction. Recognition was beginning, slowly, painfully, but not completely. A waiter approached with refreshments. As everyone accepted glasses of juice, Natasha excused herself to greet an arriving government minister. "I'll be back in a few minutes." She walked away, leaving Chanda and Mapalo standing only a few feet apart. For the first time, neither had anyone else directing the conversation. So, Chanda began, how long have you worked with the Mulenga Foundation? Almost 5 years. His eyebrows lifted slightly. 5 years. Yes. I started as an executive trainee, and now you're director of community development. I've been fortunate to have excellent mentors. You must have worked incredibly hard. I did, she answered simply. No boasting, no self-pity, only truth. And your family? The question escaped before he realized what he had asked. Mapalo held his gaze. My daughter and I are doing very well. The words struck him strangely. My daughter. Not our daughter. Something tightened inside his chest. You have only one child. Yes. She's 6 now. Again, something felt familiar. 6 years. He unconsciously calculated the number. For reasons he couldn't explain, his pulse quickened. Children grow up quickly. They do. You blink, and suddenly they're asking questions you aren't ready to answer. Chanda looked surprised. You sound like you've experienced that. Mapalo's smile became softer. I have. Before he could continue, Benson returned. Mrs. Zulu, the minister from the Education Council would like a few minutes. I'll be right there. She turned politely toward Chanda. It was nice meeting you. You as well. She walked away with the same calm confidence she had carried throughout the evening. Chanda watched until she disappeared into the crowd. Benson remained beside him. What do you think of her? Chanda smiled thoughtfully. Remarkable. She seems. He searched for the right word. Strong. Benson nodded. She didn't have much choice. What do you mean? Life wasn't always kind to her. Chanda looked interested. I suppose success usually has a difficult beginning. For some people, Benson replied quietly. It begins with losing everything. Those words lingered after Benson walked away. Throughout dinner, Chanda found himself glancing toward Mapalo again and again. She moved naturally among guests, remembered people's names, stopped to speak with junior staff members as warmly as she greeted wealthy donors. When an elderly volunteer accidentally dropped a stack of documents, Mapalo immediately bent down to help gather every page herself. No cameras were nearby. No journalists were watching. She simply helped because someone needed help. Without realizing it, Chanda smiled. Then he caught himself. Why did this woman feel so familiar? Later that evening, the charity auction began. Several companies pledged large donations. Natasha stood and announced a contribution of 5 million kwacha from Wansa Global Holdings. The ballroom erupted in applause. When it became Mapalo's turn to speak again, she walked calmly back onto the stage. We're deeply grateful. Every contribution tonight represents hope. She paused before continuing. But I want to ask everyone here for something money cannot buy. The ballroom became silent. I hope that when you leave tonight, you remember that every successful person was once someone who needed another human being to believe in them. No child dreams of becoming poor. No widow dreams of raising a family alone. No father imagines losing the people who once trusted him completely. We rise because someone chooses compassion instead of judgment. Several guests quietly wiped away tears. Even seasoned executives lowered their eyes. The speech wasn't dramatic, it was honest, and honesty often carried more power than performance. When the applause finally faded, Chanda remained seated. His heart felt unexpectedly heavy. He couldn't explain why. The phrase echoed inside his mind. No father imagines losing the people who once trusted him completely. For the first time in years, he thought about Thandi. not as an obligation, not as part of a past he wanted to forget, but as a little girl whose laughter had once filled a tiny rented house. He suddenly realized something unsettling. He couldn't remember the sound of her voice anymore. The realization left him shaken. As guests prepared to leave, Natasha approached him. "You've been unusually quiet tonight." "I suppose I have. What are you thinking about?" He looked across the ballroom toward Mapalo, who was helping volunteers pack donation materials instead of celebrating her own success. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But I feel like I've forgotten something important." Across the room, Mama Beatrice noticed him watching Mapalo. She quietly turned to Benson. "It's beginning." Benson nodded. "Do you think he recognizes her?" "Not yet. But guilt remembers before the mind does." She smiled gently. "And soon, memory will catch up." Neither Chanda nor Mapalo knew that the evening had already set something irreversible into motion. The next meeting would not happen by chance. It would happen because Chanda himself would insist on seeing her again. And that decision would bring him closer to a truth he was still completely unprepared to face. For the next several days, Chanda found it impossible to concentrate. The quarterly reports on his desk remained unfinished. Emails piled up unanswered. During meetings, colleagues repeated questions because his attention drifted somewhere else. Again and again, his thoughts returned to one person, Mapalo Zulu. Not because she had impressed the audience, not because her projects had attracted national attention, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the quiet expression she wore when she looked at him. There had been no anger, no resentment, no desire to prove anything, only peace. That unsettled him more than hatred ever could. Late Monday morning, Natasha stepped into his office carrying a folder. "You've missed 2 deadlines." Chanda looked up apologetically. "I'm sorry. That's unlike you." She sat across from him. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "Do you remember the woman from the charity gala?" "Mapalo." "Yes," Natasha smiled. "I assumed you'd be asking about her eventually." "What do you mean? You couldn't stop watching her." He looked embarrassed. "I wasn't watching." "You were." She laughed softly. "I noticed details." He leaned back in his chair. "I keep feeling like I've met her before." Natasha shrugged. "Perhaps your paths crossed years ago." "Maybe. But it feels different." She studied him carefully. "Would you like an introduction?" He looked surprised. "You know her well. Our companies are discussing a long-term partnership. There will be another meeting next week. If you have questions about the community project, you're welcome to join." Chanda nodded almost immediately. "Yes. I'd like that." As Natasha left the office, she couldn't explain why his interest bothered her. She had always respected Chanda's professionalism. He rarely became distracted by people, especially not after a single meeting. Something about this felt unusual. Across the city, Mapalo was reviewing proposals with Benson when he mentioned the upcoming partnership meeting. Mwansa Global Holdings confirmed attendance. She looked up from the documents. "Good. They've shown genuine interest." Benson hesitated. "Chanda Zulu will also attend." For the first time that morning, Mapalo became completely still. "I expected that." "Are you comfortable with it?" She closed the folder quietly. "I've spent 5 years rebuilding my life. I won't allow one meeting to undo that." Benson smiled. "I thought you'd say that. But remember, you never have to prove your strength." She nodded gratefully. "I know." The following Thursday, executives from both organizations gathered inside a modern conference room overlooking downtown Lusaka. Large presentation screens displayed plans for expanding women's entrepreneurship programs into rural provinces. When Chanda entered, his eyes instinctively searched the room. He found Mapalo standing beside the projector, discussing financial forecasts with two analysts. She wore a navy blue business suit instead of the elegant gown from the gala. Without evening makeup or formal jewelry, she appeared even more natural, even more familiar. She noticed him approaching. "Good morning, Mr. Zulu." "Good morning. I hope traffic wasn't too bad." It wasn't. There was an awkward pause, then she gestured toward an empty chair. "Please. We're just about to begin." Throughout the meeting, Chanda found himself increasingly impressed. Mapalo understood budgets as well as community needs. She challenged unrealistic projections without embarrassing anyone. When junior staff struggled to explain certain data, she patiently helped them finish instead of taking over. She led without making others feel small. At one point, an accountant apologized for making an error in the financial report. "I'm sorry. I completely overlooked this section." Mapalo smiled reassuringly. "Then let's correct it together." No one learns by pretending mistakes don't exist. The accountant visibly relaxed. Chanda quietly observed everything. Years earlier, he had often watched Mapalo encourage neighbors in exactly the same gentle way. The setting had changed. Her character had not. After 3 hours, the meeting concluded successfully. Most participants gathered their laptops and prepared to leave. Chanda remained behind. "So," Mapalo looked toward him. "Do you have another question about the proposal?" "Actually, I wanted to ask something personal." She waited calmly. "Were you always involved in business?" "No." "What did you do before?" She answered honestly. "I baked bread." His heart skipped. "Bread?" "Yes. Near the central bus station." He stared at her. "I remember buying bread there once." She smiled faintly. Many people did. The silence between them deepened. Finally, he asked, "Were you married?" The question hung heavily in the air. "Yes. And now, I'm divorced." "I'm sorry." "There are worse things than divorce." He looked puzzled. "What could be worse?" She answered without hesitation. "Losing yourself while trying to keep someone else." The words struck him harder than she intended. He looked away. "I suppose that's true." Before either of them could continue, Benson returned carrying additional documents. "Mrs. Zulu, the chairman needs your signature." "I'll be there in a moment." She nodded politely toward Chanda. "It was nice talking with you." "You too." After she left, Chanda remained standing alone in the conference room. Bread, a daughter, a divorce. 5 years. Every new detail fit strangely with memories he had spent years trying to bury. Yet his mind still refused to make the final connection. That evening, unable to silence his curiosity, he searched for recent interviews featuring Mapalo online. Several videos appeared. One business magazine profile caught his attention. The interviewer asked, "What achievement are you most proud of?" Mapalo smiled. "My daughter." Everything else came after her. Another question followed. "What motivated you during your hardest years?" She answered quietly. "I made a promise to a little girl that no matter how painful life became, she would never believe she was abandoned." Chanda suddenly stopped the video. Abandoned. The word echoed painfully inside him. He poured himself a glass of water, but his hands were trembling. For the first time in years, guilt became impossible to ignore. The next morning, he visited his mother's house after nearly 6 months without seeing her. His mother, Miriam Zulu, welcomed him warmly, despite the long silence. "You finally remembered I exist." He smiled awkwardly. "I've been busy." She shook her head. Busy people still have mothers. They shared tea together before she looked at him carefully. Something is troubling you. He sighed. Have you ever thought about Mapalo? His mother became very quiet. I think about her often. And Thandi. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every time I pass a little girl wearing braids. Chanda lowered his eyes. I made mistakes. Miriam looked at her son with sadness rather than anger. No. You made choices. Mistakes happen in a moment. Choices shape entire lives. He whispered, Do you know where they are now? She nodded slowly. I've always known. He looked up in surprise. You did? I visited them. Not at first. Because Mapalo asked for space. But later. I couldn't ignore my granddaughter. His face lost its color. You never told me. You never asked. Silence filled the room. Then Miriam quietly stood and walked to an old cabinet. She returned holding a small envelope. Inside were photographs. Thandi, growing older each year. First day of school, birthday celebrations, holding certificates, smiling beside Mapalo. Chanda stared at them in disbelief. He had missed everything, every milestone, every memory, every year. One photograph slipped from his hands onto the table. It showed 6-year-old Thandi standing proudly beside Mapalo outside the Mulenga Foundation headquarters. For the first time, he truly looked at the child's face. His own eyes stared back at him. His breathing stopped. The impossible truth he had resisted for days finally crashed into him with overwhelming force. The remarkable woman he had met, the successful director everyone admired, wasn't merely someone from his past. She was Mapalo, his former wife, and the little girl whose smile appeared in every photograph was the daughter he had abandoned. Chanda sat motionless long after his mother had left the room. The photographs remained scattered across the dining table. Each one represented a year he had willingly erased from his own life. There was Thandi on her first day of preschool, proudly wearing a tiny blue uniform with an oversized backpack. Another showed her missing her first tooth while laughing into the camera. One captured her standing beside a science fair project, holding a certificate almost as large as herself. Every picture held the same painful truth. She had grown up without him. He slowly picked up the oldest photograph. It had been taken only a few months after he walked away. Mapalo stood outside a modest apartment, holding baby Thandi against her shoulder. Her smile looked tired, but it was still there. His mother quietly returned, carrying another cup of tea. She placed it beside him without speaking. Several minutes passed before Chanda finally whispered, "She never remarried." Miriam shook her head. "No. I assumed. You assumed many things." He lowered his eyes. "I thought she'd move on." "She did." His mother answered gently. "But moving on isn't the same as replacing people." He looked confused. "Mapalo never spent those years waiting for you. She spent them building a life. There's a difference." The words settled heavily inside him. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "No," Miriam answered honestly. "You don't." He looked up surprised by her bluntness. "But forgiveness isn't something people deserve. It's something another person chooses. If they ever do." She sat beside him. "I visited your daughter whenever Mapalo allowed it. Do you know what she always asked me?" He swallowed nervously. "What? Is Daddy happy?" Chanda closed his eyes. His chest tightened painfully. "She never asked whether you were rich or whether you bought her gifts. She only wondered if you were happy." His breathing became uneven. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. I told her I hoped one day you would become the man she already believed you were. For the first time in years, Chanda cried openly, not because he had lost money, not because his career was in danger, but because he suddenly understood the size of the wound he had created. Across the city, Mapalo was preparing for another board meeting. She knew nothing about Chanda's discovery. Her schedule remained full. Community projects, budget reviews, scholarship approvals. Life continued moving forward. During lunch, Benson entered her office carrying several documents. There may be a complication. What happened? Mwansa Global Holdings requested another private meeting. That's expected. They specifically requested you. She looked up. Who, Abi? Chanda. The room became quiet. After several seconds, Mapalo asked calmly, did he say why? No. But, Benson hesitated. I think he knows. She slowly leaned back in her chair. I wondered when it would happen. You don't seem surprised. I've been expecting this moment for 5 years. Were you afraid of it? She considered the question carefully. I used to be. And now? Now I'm only curious. That evening after work, Mapalo picked Thandi up from piano lessons. The little girl climbed into the car with a wide smile. Mama, I played the whole song without stopping. I'm proud of you. I only made one mistake. Mapalo laughed. Only one. That's wonderful. As they drove home, Thandi looked out the window. Mama. Yes. Can I ask you something? Always. If Daddy ever wanted to see me, would you let him? The question came so unexpectedly that Mapalo almost missed the next traffic light. She pulled the car safely to the side of the road, then turned toward her daughter. Why are you asking? Thandi shrugged. I was thinking. My friend Grace said her parents got divorced. But her daddy still visits. Mine doesn't. She looked down at her hands. Maybe he forgot. Mapalo reached over and gently held them. Your father didn't forget you. Then why? She searched for words that would tell the truth without placing hatred inside a child's heart. Sometimes, people become so busy chasing the life they want that they lose sight of the people who mattered most. Thandi thought quietly. Does that make him a bad person? Mapalo answered carefully. It means he made very bad choices. People are more than the worst thing they've ever done, but they must accept responsibility for those choices. Thandi nodded slowly. If he came, I think I'd still like to know him. Mapalo smiled sadly. I know. Children often left room for hope long after adults had surrendered it. The following afternoon, Chanda arrived alone at the Mulenga Foundation headquarters. His expensive black sedan pulled into the visitor parking area. For several minutes, he remained seated behind the steering wheel. He suddenly felt more nervous than he had during any corporate presentation. The receptionist greeted him warmly. Good afternoon. How may I help you? I have a meeting with Mrs. Mapalo Zulu. She smiled politely. One moment. While waiting, Chanda noticed framed photographs decorating the lobby walls. Community health clinics, women's cooperatives, scholarship recipients. Then his eyes stopped on one large photograph. Mapalo stood surrounded by dozens of smiling children. Beside her, holding her hand, was Thandi. He walked closer. The resemblance was undeniable. His eyes, his smile, his chin. How had he failed to see it before? She's beautiful, isn't she? A familiar voice spoke behind him. He turned. Mama Beatrice stood quietly a few steps away. She is. The older woman joined him before the photograph. Mapalo tells me she's the greatest blessing in her life. Chanda swallowed. I've made terrible mistakes. Mama Beatrice looked directly at him. Yes, I know. You know, I've known from the beginning. His heart sank. You knew who I was, the day I first met Mapalo. And you still allowed me into your meetings. She nodded. I wanted to see whether success had changed your character. And, she answered honestly, it did. Her words carried no anger, only disappointment. I don't know how to fix this. You don't. She replied gently. You can't repair 5 years with one apology. He lowered his head. I understand. Do you? She pointed toward the photograph again. Do you know who attended every school performance? Who stayed awake through every fever? Who worked 3 jobs so that little girl could dream without fear? He whispered, Mapalo. Exactly. Never confuse biology with fatherhood. The word struck him harder than any insult could have. Just then, Benson approached. Mrs. Zulu is ready to see you. Chanda took a deep breath. His legs suddenly felt heavy. He followed Benson down a long hallway lined with glass offices. Every step brought him closer to the woman he had betrayed, the woman he had failed to recognize, the woman who had rebuilt everything without him. Benson stopped before a wooden office door. He knocked once, then quietly stepped aside. She's waiting. Chanda slowly reached for the handle. On the other side of that door, his past, his guilt, and perhaps his only chance to finally face the truth, were waiting for him. Chanda stood outside Mapalo's office for several seconds, unable to move. The polished wooden door seemed heavier than any obstacle he had faced in business. Negotiating million kwacha contracts had never frightened him. Walking into this room did. He raised his hand, knocked gently. Come in. The calm voice from inside instantly transported him back years, to evenings in their tiny rented house, to quiet conversations by candlelight, to promises he had once believed he would keep forever. He slowly opened the door. Mapalo sat behind a large wooden desk, reviewing several project reports. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, overlooking the Lusaka skyline. Photographs of community projects decorated one wall. Awards and certificates lined another. Nothing about the office felt extravagant. Everything reflected purpose rather than status. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. Please. He sat down. His throat felt dry. The words refused to come. Mapalo waited patiently. She wasn't in a hurry. She had already waited 5 years. I'm sorry. The sentence escaped almost as a whisper. She nodded politely. I expected that. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, she answered quietly. You don't. There was no anger in her voice, only honesty. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Chanda asked, Why didn't you tell me who you were at the charity gala? Mapalo smiled faintly. I wanted to know whether you would recognize me. He lowered his head. I didn't. No. You didn't. And that told me everything. His chest tightened. I don't understand. You looked directly into my eyes. You shook my hand. You admired my work. But you never truly saw me. She leaned forward slightly. You recognized success. You didn't recognize the woman who stood beside you when you had nothing. Those words cut deeper than any accusation. He covered his face briefly with both hands. I've thought about that every hour since. I don't know how I became that person. Mapalo looked at him with quiet sadness. It didn't happen overnight. It happened one choice at a time. Outside the office, Benson quietly closed the hallway door, ensuring no one would disturb them. Inside, the conversation continued. I visited my mother, Chanda said. She showed me photographs of Thandi. Mapalo remained silent. I missed everything. Her birthdays, her first day of school, every milestone. His voice cracked. I wasn't there. No, you weren't. I've spent the last 5 years telling myself I was building a better future. But all I really built was a life without the people who mattered most. Mapalo folded her hands together. Do you know what hurt the most? He shook his head. It wasn't the divorce. It wasn't losing our home. It wasn't working 3 jobs. She paused. It was watching our daughter wait by the window every Friday evening. He looked confused. Why Friday? Because you always came home on Fridays when you were still trying. The memory struck him instantly. Every Friday he had once brought home fresh fruit from the market, sometimes oranges, sometimes bananas, sometimes only one mango they all shared. Thandi had begun waiting by the window because she believed her father always returned on Fridays. Mapalo continued softly. She waited. Week after week, month after month. Even after I stopped believing, his eyes filled with tears. What did you tell her? At first, I said you were busy. Later, I said I didn't know. And eventually, she stopped asking. The room fell silent again. No business negotiation had ever felt this unbearable. No financial loss had ever hurt this much. After several moments, Chanda reached into his jacket pocket. I brought something. He carefully placed an old envelope on the desk. Mapalo immediately recognized it. Their wedding photograph. The one she had placed inside the wooden box years earlier. You kept it. I found another copy. I've carried it for days. I don't know why. She looked at the faded picture. 2 young people smiling without fear, believing love alone could survive anything. They were good people, she said quietly. They just weren't prepared for pride. Chanda nodded, slowly. I thought success would make me happy. Did it? He looked around the office, then back at her. I achieved everything I wanted. The promotions, the respect, the money. But every victory became quieter. And every year, I felt emptier. Mapalo listened without interrupting. He continued. I kept telling myself I'd visit. Then another month passed. Then another year. Eventually, I became too ashamed. She answered gently. Shame grows when we feed it with silence. At that moment, someone knocked lightly on the office door. Benson stepped inside. I'm sorry to interrupt. The board meeting begins in 20 minutes. Mapalo nodded. We'll be there. As Benson turned to leave, Chanda spoke. Wait. Benson looked back. I owe you an apology too. Benson seemed surprised. For what? You helped raise my daughter. You supported Mapalo. You became the kind of friend I should have been. Benson smiled politely. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's exactly why I'm grateful. After Benson left, Chanda stood slowly. I'd like to meet Thandi. Mapalo remained silent. I know I have no right to ask, but I need one chance. She looked at him carefully. For whose sake? He frowned. What do you mean? Do you want to meet her because she needs a father? Or because you need forgiveness? The question caught him completely off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For nearly a minute he couldn't answer. Finally, he spoke honestly. I don't know. Mapalo nodded. That's the first honest thing you've said today. He managed a weak smile. I'm trying. I know. She stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the city. When Thandi was 4, she drew a picture. It showed 3 people holding hands. You, her, and me. Even though you hadn't seen her in years, she still believed our family existed. His breathing became uneven. I don't deserve her love. No, but children rarely measure people by what they deserve. They measure them by hope. She turned toward him. I won't allow anyone to break her heart again. I understand. So, if you become part of her life, it won't happen because you suddenly remembered she exists. It will happen because you're willing to spend the rest of your life proving you've changed. He nodded without hesitation. I will. Words are easy. I know. Then start with actions. He accepted that. There would be no dramatic reunion, no instant forgiveness, no miraculous restoration, only the difficult road of accountability. As he prepared to leave, Mapalo spoke one final sentence. Oh, he turned. There is something else you should know. What is it? She looked directly into his eyes. Next Saturday, you're invited to Thandi's School Leadership Award ceremony. His eyes widened. She won. Yes. She'll be receiving the Young Community Leader Award. A proud smile crossed Mapalo's face. She's been organizing food collections for children in need. Chanda's eyes immediately filled with tears again. My daughter. Our daughter. Mapalo corrected gently. Our daughter. For the first time in 5 years, she had spoken those words, not as an invitation to rebuild a marriage, but as a reminder that no matter how much time had passed, responsibility could never truly be abandoned. Chanda walked out of the office carrying no contracts, no promotions, no trophies, only something infinitely more valuable. A chance. Perhaps the last one he would ever receive. The entire drive home, Chanda never turned on the radio. The silence inside the car felt appropriate. For years, he had filled every empty space with work meetings, business trips, and endless ambition. Now silence forced him to hear something he had ignored for far too long, his own conscience. When he reached his luxury apartment, he stood at the entrance without unlocking the door. The expensive furniture inside no longer impressed him. The polished marble floors, the designer artwork, the breathtaking view of Lusaka's skyline. None of it felt like home. For the first time since leaving Mapalo, he realized he had spent years decorating a life he no longer wanted to live. He walked inside anyway. On the dining table sat a thick folder labeled Wedding Planning. Natasha had left it there earlier that afternoon. Inside were venue designs, guest lists, flowers arrangements, a schedule leading to the wedding that would take place in just over 2 weeks. Chanda stared at the folder for a long time before quietly closing it. He knew he could no longer pretend, not with Natasha, not with himself. The following morning, he requested a private meeting. Natasha arrived carrying her usual tablet and notebook. I assume this is about the merger proposal. It isn't. She immediately noticed the difference in his voice. What happened? He took a deep breath. I've been lying. She frowned. What do you mean? Not about work. My personal life. She slowly sat down. I'm listening. For nearly 30 minutes, Chanda told her everything. His marriage, Mapalo, little Thandi, the poverty they endured together, his growing ambition, the divorce, the years of silence, the chance encounter at the charity gala, and finally, his discovery that the woman everyone admired was the wife he had abandoned. Natasha never interrupted. She simply listened. When he finished, the room remained silent. Finally, she asked one quiet question. When were you planning to tell me? I don't know. You were going to marry me. I know. And I learned the truth from someone else. He lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. She laughed softly, not with amusement, with disappointment. Do you know what hurts the most? What? I believed you were a man who kept his promises. She stood and walked toward the window. I could have forgiven a failed marriage. I could have understood youthful mistakes. But 5 years, she turned to face him. 5 years without your daughter. He had no answer. Natasha's voice remained calm. You didn't just abandon your family. You abandoned yourself. Tears filled her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. I don't want a husband who can erase people when they become inconvenient. She removed the engagement ring from her finger, then gently placed it on the table. I hope one day you become the father your daughter deserves. But I won't become your wife. Without another word, she walked out. The office door closed quietly behind her. No shouting, no insults, just the unmistakable sound of a future disappearing. News traveled quickly through Lusaka's business community. The engagement was cancelled. Rumors spread immediately. Some blamed work pressures. Others speculated about financial disagreements. Only a handful of people knew the real reason. Mama Beatrice was one of them. When Benson informed her, she simply nodded. Truth always asks for a price. Across town, Mapalo had no interest in gossip. She learned about the cancelled engagement only because a colleague mentioned it during lunch. I heard Mr. Zulu's wedding has been called off. Mapalo paused for only a second before continuing to review documents. I hope everyone involved finds peace. Her colleague looked surprised. That's all. What else should I say? I thought you'd be happy. Mapalo smiled gently. Someone else's pain doesn't heal mine. Benson overheard the conversation. Later that afternoon, he found her organizing scholarship applications. You really mean that? She looked up. Mean what? That you don't want revenge. She thought for a moment. When Chanda left, I wanted answers, not revenge. And now, I want something different. What? She looked toward a framed photograph of Thandi on her desk. I want my daughter to grow up believing forgiveness is strength, not weakness. Saturday arrived. The auditorium at Thandi's primary school buzzed with excited families. Children adjusted their uniforms. Parents searched for seats. Teachers rehearsed the ceremony one final time. Mapalo arrived early as she always did. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, nothing extravagant. This day belonged to her daughter, not to appearances. Thandi rushed toward her. Mama, I practiced my speech. I can't wait to hear it. The little girl suddenly looked toward the entrance. Someone's here. Mapalo turned. Chanda stood quietly near the back of the hall. He wore a plain navy suit. No bodyguards, no assistant, no expensive watch. He looked strangely nervous. Their eyes met. Mapalo gave a small nod. Nothing more. He slowly walked over. Good morning. Good morning. I wasn't sure if I should come. You were invited. That doesn't mean I'm welcome. She answered honestly. That depends on what happens after today. Before he could reply, Thandi approached. She stopped a few feet away, studying him carefully. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the little girl smiled politely. Hello? Chanda felt his throat tighten. Hello, Thandi. You know my name. I've always known your name. She tilted her head. I've seen your picture. He nodded slowly. So have I. Another silence. Finally, she asked the question that had lived inside her heart for years. Are you my daddy? The entire world seemed to stop. Chanda knelt until they were at eye level. Yes, I am. I'm very sorry. The little girl looked at him thoughtfully. Children often searched faces before believing words. Were you lost? He almost broke. No. I made bad choices. Very bad choices. She considered his answer carefully. Mama says good people can make bad choices. They just have to tell the truth. He looked toward Mapalo. She hadn't prepared Thandi to hate him. She had prepared her to understand honesty. Tears finally escaped. I'm trying to tell the truth now. Thandi stepped forward, very slowly. She wrapped her small arms around his neck. The embrace lasted only a few seconds. But for Chanda, it felt like receiving a gift he no longer believed he deserved. When she stepped back, she smiled shyly. I have to get my award. You should. I'm proud of you. She beamed. I haven't even won it yet. I already know you did. Minutes later, the ceremony began. One by one, students received recognition for academic excellence, leadership, and service. Finally, the principal smiled toward the audience. Our Young Community Leader Award goes to a student who organized food collections for families in need. Please congratulate Thandi Zulu. The auditorium erupted into applause. Thandi walked confidently onto the stage. After receiving her certificate, she stood behind the microphone. She unfolded a small piece of paper. My mama taught me that when someone is hungry, you share. When someone is lonely, you sit beside them. And when someone makes a mistake, you give them a chance to become better. She smiled toward the audience. I want to help people because someone helped my mama. The applause grew even louder. Chanda buried his face in his hands. Everything his daughter had become, she had learned from the woman he had abandoned. No amount of money could erase that truth. As the audience rose for a standing ovation, he turned toward Mapalo, quietly, sincerely, without expecting anything in return. Thank you. She simply nodded, not because the past had disappeared, but because at last he had begun to understand the immeasurable value of everything he had thrown away. The applause inside the school auditorium continued long after Thandi returned to her seat. Parents congratulated one another. Teachers wiped away quiet tears. Children proudly held their certificates as cameras flashed throughout the hall. But Chanda barely noticed any of it. His attention never left his daughter. For years, he had imagined success as standing on a stage receiving applause from strangers. Now he realized true success was watching the child he had once abandoned become someone whose kindness inspired an entire room. And he had almost missed all of it. When the ceremony ended, families gathered outside beneath the shade of large jacaranda trees. Children laughed while chasing one another across the schoolyard. Teachers chatted with parents. Volunteers served juice and homemade cakes. Thandi held her certificate tightly as several classmates congratulated her. Mama, I told you I wouldn't forget my speech. You were amazing. Mapalo kissed her forehead. I've never been more proud. The little girl looked toward Chanda. Did you hear everything? He smiled through moist eyes. I heard every word. She grinned. Good. I practiced for 3 days. For the first time in years, the three of them stood together. Not as a reunited family, not as strangers, but as people sharing one important moment. After Thandi ran off to play with her friends, Chanda turned toward Mapalo. I owe you more than an apology. She folded her hands calmly. You owe your daughter consistency, not speeches. He nodded. I know. I've spent years making promises. I'm done making them. I want to earn trust. She studied him carefully. And how will you do that? One day at a time. If Thandi allows me into her life, I'll be there. School meetings, birthdays, ordinary afternoons. I don't want grand moments. I want the small ones. Mapalo remained silent for several seconds. Then she asked the question that mattered most. What happens when work becomes busy again? He answered immediately. Work will wait. What if another promotion comes? I'll celebrate with my daughter. What if people tell you she's holding you back? A sad smile crossed his face. I've already believed that lie once. I won't believe it again. Mapalo saw something different in his eyes. Not confidence, humility. The kind that only grows after someone has lost everything that truly mattered. She nodded slowly. Then start. That afternoon, Chanda did something he had not done in years. He turned off his phone. Instead of returning to the office, he spent the afternoon walking through the school garden with Thandi. She proudly introduced him to her favorite teacher, showed him the tree she had planted during Environment Week, explained every drawing hanging inside her classroom. Children naturally filled silence with stories. He listened to every single one. When she spoke about science projects, he listened. When she described her favorite books, he listened. When she admitted she was afraid of thunderstorms, he listened. For the first time since she had been a baby, he was simply present. As the sun began to set, Thandi stopped beside a playground swing. Daddy. The word still sounded unfamiliar after so many years. Yes. Can we come here again? His throat tightened. If your mama says yes. She laughed. You always ask mama. He smiled. Because she's been making the important decisions for a long time. Across the playground, Mapalo watched quietly. Mama Beatrice stood beside her. You've given him a chance. Mapalo nodded. A chance? Not a shortcut. Mama Beatrice smiled. That's wise. They both deserve better than false hope. I know. And what about you? Mapalo looked toward the setting sun. For a long time, I believed my story ended the day Chanda left. She smiled gently. But now I understand something. What? My story never depended on him. It depended on the choices I made after he was gone. Mama Beatrice placed an affectionate hand on her shoulder. And look where those choices brought you. Several months passed. Chanda kept every promise. He attended every school meeting. He never missed another birthday. He called when he said he would. If work required travel, he scheduled video calls with Thandi every evening. Slowly, very slowly, trust began replacing uncertainty. Not perfectly. Some wounds still remained. There were difficult conversations, awkward moments, questions that could never receive satisfying answers. But healing rarely happened all at once. It happened through ordinary acts repeated consistently over time. Meanwhile, Mapalo continued expanding community programs across Zambia. Under her leadership, hundreds of women received business training. Thousands of children gained access to school supplies and nutritious meals. The little bakery that had once supported a struggling single mother had grown into a nationwide initiative, helping families build sustainable livelihoods. Whenever journalists asked about her remarkable journey, her answer never changed. I was never rescued. I was encouraged. There's a difference. 1 year later, the Mulenga Foundation celebrated its annual Leadership Awards. This time, Mama Beatrice officially announced her retirement. Standing before hundreds of employees, she smiled warmly. I spent 40 years building this organization. But today, I proudly place its future into the hands of someone whose character is greater than her title. She invited Mapalo onto the stage. The audience rose in a standing ovation. As Mapalo accepted the responsibility, she looked toward the front row. Thandi was cheering louder than anyone. Beside her sat Chanda, not in the front because of his corporate status, not because he was a sponsor, but because he was there as a father. Nothing more, nothing less. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded Mapalo. One journalist asked if you could speak to the woman you were 5 years ago. The woman abandoned with a baby and no future. What would you tell her? Mapalo smiled thoughtfully before answering. I would tell her not to confuse someone else's decision with her own worth. I would tell her that rejection can become redirection. And I would tell her to keep walking, because one faithful step can change an entire generation. The following morning, Chanda visited the modest cemetery where his late father rested. He placed fresh white lilies beside the grave. I finally understand, he whispered. I spent years chasing success, but I nearly lost the people who gave success meaning. The wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time in many years, his heart felt lighter, not because the past had disappeared, but because he had finally stopped running from it. Some stories end with a wedding, some end with revenge. This one ended differently. A broken marriage was never restored. Mapalo and Chanda did not become husband and wife again. Life had carried them too far down different roads. But something far more important was rebuilt: respect, responsibility, and the bond between a father and his daughter. Sometimes justice is not watching someone lose everything. Sometimes justice is watching someone finally become the person they should have been all along. And sometimes the greatest victory is discovering that forgiveness does not erase the past. It simply refuses to let the past steal the future. Life has a quiet way of revealing what truly matters. Wealth can open doors, status can earn applause, and success can change how the world sees us. But none of those things can replace the love we neglect or the family we leave behind. Chanda spent years chasing a future he believed would make him whole, only to discover that every achievement felt empty without the people who had once believed in him. Mapalo, on the other hand, proved that heartbreak does not have to become the end of a story. Through courage, dignity, and perseverance, she transformed pain into purpose and became a light for countless others. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: your value is never determined by the person who walks away from you. It is determined by the choices you make after they leave. Bitterness may seem easier, but kindness has the power to build a future that revenge never could. Forgiveness does not always restore relationships, but it can restore peace within our own hearts. If this story touched you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Mapalo's journey moved you the most? Do you believe people who make painful mistakes can truly change? Share your answer in the comments below. We read every one of them. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about hope, justice, family, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel. Like this video and share it with someone who may need a little encouragement today. Thank you for watching, and may your own journey always be guided by courage, compassion, and